Oh, good morning, everyone. It's good to see everybody. First couple days of summer, huh? 66 last night in Tasuki. Second day of summer, pretty cool. I mean, cool in a cool way. So, hey, it's a very special day in our church today. We have some very special guests from both Ohio and Kansas. And yes, you Kansasites, this is not Kansas anymore. Welcome to Santa Fe. But what a pleasure it is. This is our second annual Bible camp that we're going to be holding with the Nambe Pueblo. And this year, Powake will be joining us. So we're going to ask each and every one of you to be praying throughout the week as we go out to minister to the children and prayerfully some of the parents. So this week or today, you're going to get to meet some of the folks that are going to be involved, as I mentioned earlier, from both Ohio and Kansas. So with that said, because we've got a very special guest speaker this morning, a gentleman by the name of Craig Warner. And I don't want to take much of his time, but I do want to take a few minutes to introduce the teams from both Kansas and Ohio. I'm going to ask David Shelby, who is an absolute dear friend of mine. We grew up in the same church back in Kansas City several years ago. And then he ended up moving to Denver, which was a really awesome thing for us because we did a lot of things together back in the day when Dale Moline was up there. And we do miss you guys. And it's great to have you with us. And we're going to introduce the Iola team. Iola, Kansas is in eastern Kansas, right on the Missouri state line pretty much. It's about, an hour and a half south of Kansas City, right? Right now. Yeah. So I'm not going to take any more David's time. So introduce the team, bro. I'm so glad you're here. I love you, man.
Thanks for taking care of the kids last night. And you guys have been great. Well, anyway, it's good to be here. I haven't been here since, I think, 2003. We were trying to figure it up last night. It's been a while. And so I've forgotten a few things since then, probably a few people since then. And so, but it's good to be back. It's always good to be in the area. I was introduced to Iola through a youth camp in 2001 at Glorieta. And so we brought a group of kids down. We did a combined youth camp in Glorieta, New Mexico. And through that and through meeting people, it ended up moving me to Iola back in 2004 or 5. But anyway, God tells us he's called us to be ministers and to minister his gospel both in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and into the uttermost parts of the world. And so that's why we're here, is God had blessed upon our heart or put upon our hearts to try to get involved in some things within the U.S. Within our church, we've got a number of different missionaries we support and we do different things, but we also want to be active in our own nation and with our own people. And so when this opportunity came up, we decided we wanted to sort of look into this, and God has just kind of led us to be here. So we appreciate the invite. Just to introduce people, of course, I'm Dave Shelby. This is my wife, Kathy. I'll have you all stand up. I know it's embarrassing, but go ahead and do it anyway. And this is my daughter, Maya, my daughter, Cassie, and my daughter, Sydney. And so that's my family. We do have two sons that are not here. And then on the next row, we've got Mike and Dana Endicott, and Tammy Prather, and Kara Godfrey. She's our pastor's wife and puts up with him. So anyway, we appreciate again the opportunity to be here. John, here you go, man.
David Shelby, we love you, man. Welcome, Iola folks. Hey, be praying for Kara's husband, Tony, who is in Malawi, Africa, as we speak. So again, man, it's so cool to hear what folks are doing and how he's using your church. Next, I would like to introduce Craig Warner because he's going to introduce his group to us from New Philadelphia, Ohio. And got to know Craig in the last year and a half, and what a blessing he's been to our lives. The most organized person I've ever met on the planet. So it's so cool to...
I think I have some competition with Larry, though.
Larry Social. Yeah, you're right. I would agree.
Man.
I would agree. But, man, Craig, I can't even begin to tell you what you guys mean to us. And we're so grateful to you guys from Iola as well as the New Philly group. You have no clue what you guys mean to us and how you're committing to minister to the people in our community. And so grateful. My wife keeps kind of tabs on how some of you guys are doing all you can to earn funds and money to come here. And words can't express how honored we are to have you, for the commitment that you guys make to come and minister in New Mexico, and especially to our wonderful, great neighbors and brothers and sisters, the Pueblo Indians, and we're so excited about what God's going to do this week. So, Craig, you want to introduce the group?
Yep, I'd be glad to. I'm good.
Oh,
Am I good here?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Thank you.
So with that, I'm just going to get out of your way.
Sounds good. Thanks, buddy. No, but we're all very excited to be here again. We got to be with you last year, and just so grateful, and I'm excited to get to be with you again this year to get to reach the local Pueblo. So let me introduce my team. I was going to make you all stand up front here, but Dave gave them an easy out. So I'll just have you stand up where you're at. Anybody in this section? I'm just going to work my way across. Okay. So here we've got Rachel Liddy. She's the one that's kind of been organizing all of our worship that we'll be doing with the little kids. We've got Hannah Gamble with us again. We have Elise Thompson. And then where's Miss Bobby? I'll have you stand up too. She's here with her mama, Miss Bobby Thompson. Miss Bobby was here last year. Hannah and Rachel were all here last year. We've got Ray Gattalero. And then we got Alex Gaskin. He was here last year. He helps out with our worship too with the kids. All right. We'll start back over here. Mr. Kendall, Miss Robin Bick. They were here last year. They wanted to come back again. Miss Kimmy and Dan Miller. Kimmy was here last year. Danny gets to come this year, her husband. Mr. Mark Davis, he was here last year. Is there anybody behind you? Sorry, I can't see. Oh, okay, this is my mama, Lynn Warner. She came to keep an eye on me. Thank you, Mama. And Miss Sherry Cole. Anybody else over there? Go back over here. All right, so we're going to jump over to Ashley and Jay Kelly. They're new this year, and then this is actually Miss Bobby's other daughter, Ashley. And we got Mark and Deb Flinner. They were here last year. And who else? Who else am I missing? Is that everybody? Okay. So, yeah, I think, who was here last year? Raise your hand real quick. Okay, so a lot of people were here last year. Miss Kimmy, Miss Sherry, and Miss Bobby, they've been developing our curriculum for the camp, so they've been putting a lot of work into this beforehand, along with Rachel and Alex. Jay and Ashley, you guys raise your hand again. They're planning all the games that we'll be doing with the kids, so we're going to have a lot of fun with them that way. Miss Deb Flinner has been working on, we're doing like an art journal with the kids, along with Cass. Is she here this morning?
Yes.
Okay, with Cass Romero. So they've been helping out with that. So this is the team. I'm just so thankful for this group of people and everything that they bring to this camp. There's a lot of things that have to go into this, or else this camp wouldn't happen. And so I'm thankful for a team from our church. Thankful for the Iola team who's coming to join us this year. And then, as always, thankful for John and for Larry and for you guys here at Ascent for just always welcoming us and just bending over backwards, really, to make sure that we have what we need and to feel welcome. So thank you, guys. But this is our team here. So truly, though, you guys really do take really good care of us every time we're down here. Thanks to Dave Nebel and Larry Sosha, who driving us around, hauling our luggage, and just taking care of us that way. We're just so grateful to be here. So thanks for having us back again. It is an honor for us to be here. It's a privilege to get to be here with you guys and to join up with you in this effort that we share to reach these kids. And so, man, we're just looking forward to this next week and seeing what God is going to do. And really, we enter into this next week with faith. We believe that God will come through and do what only He can do. And so we just want to make sure that we are in a position where we can be used by God for that. And so it requires faith on our part to come into this and to trust Him and for Him to use us. And so really that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. Faith is a huge part of the Christian life, isn't it? Man, you can it's all throughout the Bible. It's something that we hear all the time. It's an essential part to the Christian life. Faith is the key to salvation, as we see in Ephesians 2:8. For by grace are ye saved through faith. Yes, it is a building block of the Christian life. And 1 Corinthians 13, it kind of breaks it all down. It says, okay, these are the main things. Now, these three things remain. These three things abide. Faith, hope, and charity. We can't please God without faith. Hebrews 11:6. But without faith, it is impossible to please Him. Now, this is probably bad for me to say, but this is one of my least favorite verses in the Bible, okay? Because that means anything in our life that we don't do in complete faith is sin. God wants us to live our entire life in faith. Everything that we do must be done in faith. And that goes on with Romans 14:23, for whatsoever is not of faith is sin, right? And so faith is just such a huge part of our life. It is so important. It is so crucial. But if you're anything like me, maybe sometimes you have a hard time putting handles on your faith, making it a little more practical, right? It's one of those things that we're afraid to pray for more of, right? Lord, give me more faith. Well, He doesn't just snap His fingers and boom, you have more faith. No, faith comes through trials and difficulty, and so we're always a little hesitant to say, no, I think I'm good on faith. I don't think I need to pray for any more faith, right? It's just one of those things that we're a little scared to pray for. God might make us do something ridiculous, right, to test our faith, and He just might. But we always want to have more faith, but we don't always know how to get it. You guys with me? Who's with me, right? It's such a crucial part, and we just have to make sure that we're living our life by faith, but sometimes it's just hard to put practical handles on faith. So how do we make living a life of faith practical in our lives? Well, there's this guy named Elisha in the Bible. He's one of my favorite guys in the Bible. He's a prophet in the Old Testament, and he lived a life of incredible faith. So if you guys would, if you have your Bibles, open up to 1 Kings this morning. 1 Kings 19, and we'll get to the story here in just a minute. Let me give you just a little bit of a background on Elisha. So Elisha followed in the footsteps of a prophet named Elijah, okay? So super confusing because they're like right next to each other, all right? You wish maybe one was in the Old Testament, one was in the New Testament. At least we can kind of keep them separate then. But Elijah, okay, the guy that came before Elisha, he was a prophet too. He took on 450 prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel. You guys familiar with that story? They're trying to call fire out of the sky. The prophets of Baal spend all day trying to get their altar to be consumed with fire, and Elisha is just Elijah, see, I can't even keep them straight. Elijah is just trash talking them the whole time, and then he has one little prayer, and boom, God consumes the altar with fire. So some incredible stuff there. Once God called Elijah up, Elisha then continued in his place, all right? Elisha lived a pretty incredible life. He saw God come through in some incredible ways. One of my favorite stories of Elisha, and we're not going to get into it this morning. We're not going to look into it in detail, but it's found in 2 Kings chapter 2. So if you have time and you're not familiar with the story, read that. But here's what happens, is Elisha sends 2 female bears to consume a group of children that are making fun of his bald head, okay? And so, seriously, if you're not read the story whenever you get a chance, okay? Now, this is great. This is one of my favorite stories because if you guys don't know, again, we're from First Baptist Church in New Philadelphia. I'm the kids pastor there, okay? So I work with kids every Sunday, every Wednesday. And, I'm sure unlike your church, you guys have angels here. Sometimes we have some disciplinary issues with kids, right? They just don't want to do what they're being told. They're just being a distraction. And so, so that our teachers can continue teaching and doing what they do, they might ask me to come and deal with the kids that are kind of giving them a hard time. So what I do is I'll get down on their level, okay, kind of take a knee so you can look at them eye to eye, and you just talk real calm with them. And then what I'll do is I'll tell them the story of Elisha sending bears to consume children. And then I'll say, so, when a bald man of God is telling you to do something, you better do it and straighten up. And then I send them back to their class crying. And we typically handle most of our disciplinary issues with a simple story from the Bible. But that's one of my favorite stories from Elisha. And as fun as that story is, today we're going to take a look at how Elisha got his start. So even though Elisha's life is characterized by radical faith, just like us, he had to start somewhere, right? We're not born with this immense amount of faith that, it's no issue for us to ever trust God. Elisha had to do the same thing. He started out, he had a beginning, just like we all have a start. He had to grow in his walk with God, just like we all have to grow in our walk with God. But we look at Elisha's life, and he's seen God come through in these incredible ways because of his faith. And we want to see that too, right? We want to see God come through, and it just requires faith on our part. So we're going to take a look at how Elisha started this life of ridiculous faith. And so in 1 Kings chapter 19, we're going to jump to the end, towards the end of the chapter, verses 19 through 21. So 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 19 through 21. It says, "So he departed thence," this is talking about Elijah, okay, the guy that came before Elisha, "and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th. And Elijah passed by him and cast his mantle upon him." Okay, so a mantle is just like a shawl or a cape, okay? And then what that does is it symbolizes authority. So he kind of passes his authority upon Elisha, unto him. "And he left the oxen," now talking about Elisha, "and he ran after Elijah and said, Let me, I pray thee, kiss my father and mother, and then I will follow thee. And he said unto him, Go back again, for what have I done to thee?" Verse 21. "And he returned back from him, and took a yoke of oxen, and slew them, and boiled their flesh with the instruments of the oxen," so the plow that he was behind, "and gave unto the people, and they did eat. Then he arose and went after Elijah, and ministered unto him." So before we break this passage down here, though, and we get into the story a little more, let's go ahead and go to God in prayer. Lord, this morning we come to you, and Lord, just already so thankful for the time of prayer that we had before the service started, thankful for the time of worship, Lord, and just as we prepare this week to go into Nambe, to share your love and your truth to the kids of Nambe and Powake, God, we're just asking that today you would teach us from your word. Lord, I pray that we can look at the life of Elisha and see how he began this life of incredible faith, and then the way he got to see you come through in incredible ways. And Lord, I pray that would be the characteristics of our life, that our life would be characterized by faith, and we would see you work. Lord, when we can have faith in you, Lord, we know that there's nothing that we can do on our own, but it all comes from you and by you. And so, Lord, we're asking you as we enter into this week to give us faith, and that by faith, Lord, we would see lives changed by showing these kids the love of God, Lord, that you would open their hearts, and then as we share the truth of your word with them, Lord, that you would change their hearts. So, God, we just pray these things in your name. All right, so we see how Elisha gets his start. And the first point that we're going to look at is Elisha's calling. Elisha's calling. In 1 Kings 19:19, it says, "So he departed thence and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th. So here's Elisha. He's got 12 yoke of oxen. So a yoke is 2. It's where they put them together. He's plowing with them. So it's 24 oxen there, and he's behind the 12th one. All right. So here's Elisha plowing the field with 24 oxen in front of him. And Elijah passed by him and cast his mantle upon him." Okay, so here we see Elisha's calling. In letter A, he was called from something familiar. He was called from something familiar. So again, here's Elisha. He's stuck behind 24 oxen behinds every day plowing the field. Okay? So, I don't know how many of you are farmers, and you got farm animals and all that, cattle or whatever. But just imagine that. Every day, hanging out behind 24 oxen. Picture that view. Imagine that smell. No, don't imagine that smell, okay? But that's monotonous. It's not exciting. It might be even a little bit gross. But regardless of how hard of a job it was for Elisha, regardless of how monotonous it was familiar. It was familiar to him. It's what he was used to. This was his everyday life. We know what that's like, right? We know what it's like to get stuck in a familiar routine. We know people that are in their job and they dislike their job, or they think it's boring, or it doesn't give them any kind of purpose for their life, right? Yet, they continue in that boring job that they hate that gives them no purpose. Well, why do they keep doing that? Well, because it's familiar. It's what they're used to. It makes them comfortable, right? Change is difficult. Change is hard. Change is scary. And so people get stuck in this life that's familiar to them, even though it's not taking them anywhere, because they're afraid to step out in faith. And so I have it this way in my notes. It says, familiarity is one of the biggest obstacles to living a life of faith. See, we get stuck in a familiar routine and we get comfortable. We feel secure. And so whenever God is asking us to step out in faith, we're hesitant because what's familiar is comfortable. And so the familiarity in our life is one of the biggest obstacles to living a life of faith. And when we find ourselves getting comfortable and secure in what's familiar, we have got to be careful. Because if we get too comfortable, too secure, we can miss out or even ignore God's call on our lives. So familiarity is one of the biggest obstacles to living a life of faith. So we saw that Elisha was called from something familiar. This job that he had behind these 12 yoke of oxen all day, every day, and then Elijah comes along and he calls him out of that familiar life. And then letter B, he was called to something greater. He was called from something familiar, but he was called to something greater. As we saw, Elisha was a farmer, and he was a hard worker, and farming is certainly a noble profession. I have incredible respect for skilled workers that make a living off their trade, especially because I am not skilled, okay? I'm very proud of myself when I can hang a picture straight, right? So, but over the last couple of years, actually, so I've been working on our house, and my dad is very skilled, and so if he can't tell me what to do, then I go to YouTube, and if YouTube can't tell me what to do, then I just say, forget it, I'll just pay somebody, okay? Right? So, but I have great respect for people that are very skilled. In fact, while I was working, just to share how unskilled I am, I was just telling the story to somebody the other day. So we were redoing our bathroom, and the deal was with my wife is if I'm going to do the work and figure out how to do it, then I get the tools that I need to do the work instead of paying somebody to come and do it, okay? So she agreed. So I got a nail gun, okay? Pretty cool. Those are pretty cool. And I was putting trim up in our bathroom. And so, you know, I'd go around the floor and then up around the doorway and nail the trim in and all that. And then it's like the next day, my wife says, you know, honey, I couldn't get the door to close. It's a pocket door, okay? She says, I couldn't get the door to close. I said, oh, that's weird. So I go and I tug on it. It's like, yeah, it's really stuck. And so I look, and I can see all the way down the door frame, I nailed my pocket door open. So I had too long of nails, and I shot straight through into the door. And so, you know, there's not a lot of privacy in our house for a little while till I could get that fixed, okay? So I'm not very skilled, and actually that's not even the worst part. Later, when I was doing the trim in the hallway on the other side of the door, I was carrying the trim in from my garage. I just cut it, and I ran into my neighbor, and he asked me how it was going. I said, oh, pretty good. I said, listen to this, though. Listen how dumb I am. And so I told him the story of how I nailed the door open. And then I go in, no joke, 2 minutes later, put the piece of trim up. Same thing. I nailed it straight through the trim into the door again, right? So I'm not a very skilled guy, all right? So there's a lot of respect for people that are skilled and make their living off of it. And Elisha was a skilled worker. And while there's nothing wrong with what Elisha was doing, God had a greater calling for his life. He had a greater calling for his life. We see this when Elijah comes and casts his mantle on Elisha. Again, this is a symbolic gesture of Elijah calling Elisha to follow in his footsteps. And one day, Elisha would have the same responsibility, the same authority that Elijah did as a prophet of God. All right, so God has a greater calling for Elisha, just like he has a greater calling for you. Regardless of what you're doing, God has something greater for you that will require more faith than you have now. So no matter where you're at in life, no matter what your walk with God is like. Even if you already live a life of incredible faith, God still has something greater for you that will require more faith than what you have today. As long as we're alive on this planet, our Christian walk will always require more faith, right? 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. So as long as we're walking through this life, it will always require faith on our part, regardless of how faithful or faith-filled our life might already be. According to 1 Peter 1:9, we will receive an end to our faith. But that's because we will see Jesus with our own eyes. Faith will always be an issue until we see Jesus face to face, right? And then that thing that we have faith in, Jesus Christ, it won't require faith because we'll be able to see him. We will see him as he is, and that'll be the end of our faith. But until that day, your life will require faith. And perhaps our greatest takeaway from this point is that Elisha was faithful right where God had him until God called him to something greater. So some of us need to hear that today, because some of us are waiting on some magical sign from God to tell us what to do. Some of us think that some service is beneath us. We're waiting for our leader to recognize how great we are, and we don't want to waste our time with little things. Maybe some of us are waiting for someone to start the ministry that best suits us. And so until they recognize that need and get something going, I'm just going to sit back and enjoy coming to church and not get involved. Right? Is that what Elisha did, though? No. He was working in the field that God had him in until God called him to something greater. Let me remind you of Luke 16:10. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. All right, so if you're here today and you're not involved with the church, man, I would encourage you to start. Okay, wherever you're at, whatever level you're at, just start serving. And as you are faithful, God will call you to something greater, just like he did in Elisha's life. And this is a principle that I learned the hard way. Okay, so as the kids pastor at the church, you're dealing with a lot of volunteers in all of our different classes that we have, and so we're always trying to get people to come and to be a part and to show up faithfully and regularly. And there's some people that are much better working with kids, or there's some people that have this great skills that you could use that would be a benefit to the ministry. But if they're not faithful, then it doesn't matter how skilled they are. I've had people that I'm like, oh man, they would be so great to help with this. They're on the ball, they're successful, they're organized, whatever, but they weren't faithful. My mistake was to ask them to come and be a part of what we were doing, and then I expect them to show up and to take care of what I need them to take care of, but because they weren't faithful before, they're not going to magically become faithful now, even though they're incredibly skilled. And so then, we're left hanging, all right? And we got to scramble. And so, if you're faithful right where God has you now, he will call you to something greater. If you're skilled and unfaithful, it doesn't matter how skilled you are. It doesn't matter how good you are at what you do. If God can't count on you to be faithful with the little that he's given you, then he's not going to give you anything else, just like we saw in Luke 16. So stop looking for a sign that you should begin serving. Stop waiting for what you think is a greater opportunity and just be faithful where you are. God will tap you on the shoulder when it's time to move on. If you want to see God faithfully provide for you tomorrow, you must be faithful right where he has you today. Because again, that's the characteristic of Elisha's life. When we first are introduced to him, he's faithful, working in the field that God has him in. If you continue reading, you see how later in his life, God was just even more faithful to come through in these incredible ways, but it's only because Elisha was faithful also. If you want to see God faithfully provide for you tomorrow, you must be faithful right where he has you today. So that's point number 1, Elisha's calling. Now let's look at Roman numeral 2, Elisha's response. Elisha's response in verse 21. And he returned back from him and took a yoke of oxen and slew them and boiled their flesh with the instruments of the oxen and gave unto the people, and they did eat. Then he arose and went after Elijah and ministered unto him. What we see here is that Elisha responded in unwavering faith and in complete surrender. Elisha responded in unwavering faith and complete surrender. Once Elisha was called, he responded in complete faith. We see here that he returned home from plowing in the field. He killed the oxen and he burned the plow. As you might saw, that's our title for today, to burn the plows. Why would he do that? Why would Elisha burn the plow? He could have saved them in case things didn't work out. He'd always have something to go back to. He could have sold them for some extra cash in case things got rough along the way in following Elijah. He could have donated them to other plowmen for spare plow parts. I'm sure they broke down. They need some new. Actually, I know nothing about plow, so I don't even know. I don't know even what different parts there would be. The plow part, maybe, huh? And then the other parts also. Right? There are a number of reasonable possibilities that Elisha could have followed through on. It almost seems ridiculous to burn the plow. But he knew that God had called him to something greater, and there was no turning back. Elisha was stepping out in faith with no backup plan. He removed all excuses to turn back. Elisha completely abandoned his old way of living, and from that point on, lived a life of incredible faith. Remember, we saw that Elisha was caught up in the familiar routine, right? And with routine comes comfort and security. But because Elisha was willing to leave his comfort zone, God was able to receive the most glory from his life. The thing that brings you the most comfort and security robs God of the most honor and glory. The thing that brings you the most comfort and security robs God of the most honor and glory. Elisha went on to see the Lord come through time after time in unbelievable ways, in ways that ended up giving God the glory for what happened, because it was nothing that Elisha could have done on his own. There was a widow and her son provided for by a bottomless jar of oil. An army on the brink of death that needed rescued in the desert, they received water from nowhere. With his own eyes, he saw the invisible army of the Lord as it protected him from his enemies. He even raised the dead to life. Why? Because he lived a life of faith. He started where he was, he responded in complete faith, and then time and time again, God came through in incredible ways because Elisha responded in faith. Someone in those stories responded in faith. So why did Elisha experience this incredible faithfulness from God? It all goes back to a simple decision to respond in complete faith and burn the plow. He removed every opportunity to go back to his old way of living. So ask yourself, what is the plow in your life? What is the thing that is keeping you from stepping out in faith? Is it a relationship holding you back? Is it a specific sin keeping you down? Is there some excuse that you're always hiding behind that keeps you in your comfort zone, feeling secure, stuck in the familiar? What is it? What is the thing that keeps you from stepping out in faith? The thing that makes you the most comfortable, the thing that robs God of the most glory. When you're faced with the decision to step out in faith, how do you respond? Do you sink back to what's comfortable, or do you burn the plow? Because that's what Elisha did. He wouldn't let himself go back to that old life. He removed plan B, okay? There was only to follow after the Lord in faithfulness. And because of that, God came through time and time again. So you might be sitting here this morning and you're just thinking, man, God never does anything incredible in my life. Well, let's stop and let's take a look at your life. Because God does incredible things. The only thing that He asks of you is to be faithful. You don't have to be skilled. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to be rich. God calls us to be obedient, to be faithful. So what is it that God is calling you to? Is there a sin holding you back? Then get accountability and burn the plow. Is there a ministry that you should be a part of, but you keep claiming that your schedule is too busy? Well, cut something from your calendar, rearrange your priorities, and burn the plow. Is it from sharing the gospel with someone? Just open your mouth and burn the plow. Is it inviting someone to church? Burn the plow and ask them. Right now. You can text them right now. Seriously, that's as easy as it is. You can pull your phone. I don't even care. You pull your phone out. You say, hey, what are you doing next Sunday? Why don't you come to church with me? Okay? And that's it. It's out there in faith. And you let God deal with the results. Is it your finances? Give more than seems reasonable. Burn the plow and trust God. Is it growing in your walk with God? Whatever that next step is it to get baptized? Is it become a member of the church? Is it to get more involved? Take that next step and burn the plow. God has chosen you. God has called you to something far greater than you would believe. So quit making excuses. You are not too young, too old, too unpopular, too dumb, too timid, too ugly, or too bald. I point at Dave because he brings it on himself, and I am follically challenged, I think is how we put it. Okay? But none of those things can keep you from being used by God. Remove the obstacles holding you back. Burn the plow. Eliminate plan B. Remove the option to turn back. Cut all ties to your old way of living. Kill the oxen. Burn the plow. And start living a life of incredible faith. So when you do that, God will use you in ways you can't imagine. He will receive the glory that He deserves. Lives will be changed when you decide to burn the plow and step out in faith. We see that